Our identity as Idahoans is just deeply intertwined with our access to public lands.
But that access has been recently under threat. Some congressmen recently pitched getting rid of millions of acres of federal land to help pay down the national debt. Remember that? It was quickly shot down. Well, all this week on the 208, we're exploring Idaho's open spaces. And we've shown you how the feds came to own so much of the West and why state endowment land isn't actually public land, but it actually brings money into the state of Idaho. And today, Morgan Romero breaks down the debate some of you probably have had with your family and friends about who should manage these lands that are in Idaho, the state or the feds.
Yeah, we're doing this series of stories because this conversation has just been really top of mind for a lot of Idahoans, a lot of people in the West. You know, from mountain biking trails to hunting grounds, Idaho's public lands truly are sacred for many who call this state home. But a growing debate over who should control these lands has some of you asking, could the state do a better job than the federal government? And what would that mean for public access? We headed to Idaho's Great Outdoors to explore what's at stake.
What was a California quail.
Being outside, listening to nature.
And I believe I heard a meadowlark.
Feeds Kevin Merrill's soul.
Just listen. Just listen. Oh, it's delightful. And just look. My wife has a serious neurological disease. She has Parkinson's, and I'm one of her caregivers. And if I can get out, focusing deliciously, intently, and completely on something natural, I go back home a better caregiver.
I've mountain biked all over, climbed all over Idaho. You know, it's been my life, my friends.
Scott moved to Boise in his 20s, drawn by the access to public lands.
Being clueless about it, coming from the East, I didn't realize, how amazing it is.
What do public lands mean to you?
Public lands means there's a place I can go without having to pay a premium. Public lands means there is value in the earth and its resources.
But, you can get out there and be more remote, and it's amazing.
To me, it's a very American idea.
But across the West, that American ideal is sparking a very American debate about who should decide the future of millions of acres of public land. Washington, D.C. or state capitals.
During the budget reconciliation process earlier this year.
And the impact will be to 1/3 of a percentage of the federal land in the state.
Some Western congressmen tried selling or transferring millions of acres of public land to states or private interests.
Nevada population centers are all encumbered by federal land that can't meet their housing and development needs without disposal of federal land.
The proposals didn't make it into the One Big Beautiful Bill. Most of Idaho's congressmen,
that's just crazy,
and their constituents thought they were a step too far.
Ryan Zinke, the former Secretary of Interior and now Congressman from Montana, and I worked very hard on making sure that we got the wholesale of public lands out of that bill.
But it couldn't happen with the kind of pushback that the people had, and that was a good thing.
They want to fish and hunt, and they want to water ski, and they want to camp, and they want to go out and enjoy this incredible blessing that we have. And they are not in any way ready to give that up.
Land swaps and sales between the feds and states do happen when it makes sense, and have since statehood. But Idahoans on both sides of the aisle share the same worry. Using budget reconciliation for a sweeping sell-off would create a bad precedent, and it would cut the public out of the process.
Exchanges have always been a way to make management more efficient.
But this idea of doing it through Congress,
or just selling it to the highest bidder, everybody, rightfully so, is worried about what's going to happen to their access. Access to public lands in Idaho is sacred.
Making money off public land isn't the federal government's main goal. It tries to balance multiple uses: recreation, logging, grazing, energy and mineral leases, often with public input. But Idaho leaders say Washington could do a better job by preventing more fires, boosting revenue, and cutting the red tape.
Under the National Environmental Policy Act, local people are supposed to have input, and nobody disagrees with that. But there have been a series of lawsuits over the years to where it's just been handcuffs on getting anything done.
So we have to go through the federal government for a lot of approvals to do anything with the federal land.
Representative Russ Fulcher believes the state would do a better job managing federal lands within our borders.
I definitely believe we need to keep the public lands in public hands. I just believe that management responsibility needs to be shifted to the state, needs to be shifted to the local stakeholders, because the current model we're struggling with, and the funding for the ag department and the Forest Service and Interior, it's going down, it's not going up.
Idaho's Attorney General agrees. Along with Governor Little, he's one of 5 elected officials on the State Land Board, which oversees the Department of Lands. In a statement to KTVB, Raul Labrador said if Idaho owned the land, the revenue could be reinvested in our own state. Labrador believes, quote, the federal government's overreach undermines our state sovereignty and shortchanges Idaho communities.
There are a lot of unanswered questions as to what that process would look like, the restrictions, the cost, the number of employees that we would need to hire at the Department of Lands to manage.
If Idaho took over federal lands, lawmakers would decide what agency would manage it and how.
At this point, I just don't think we could do it.
Idaho Department of Lands Director Dustin Miller says they couldn't afford to manage all the federal land in the state. They spent $60 million on fire suppression alone last summer, while the Forest Service spent at least 5 times that amount in Idaho.
We've got our lands to manage, 2.5 million acres. That keeps us pretty busy, and we want to continue working in partnership with our federal partners to improve the health and resiliency of federal lands here in Idaho.
While Idahoans can explore most endowment trust lands today, there's no guarantee tomorrow. The state constitution demands one thing of IDL: maximum profit for institutions like schools and prisons.
They are working lands. They belong to the endowment beneficiaries, but they do not belong to the general public.
So conservationists and outdoorsmen worry hand federal lands to the state, and it could end up in private hands, while public voices get shut out of the process.
About 42% of all the lands that the state has ever owned are gone from us. They're in private hands. And when you put something into private hands, you're really permanently closing off public access. And you're just changing the way that all Idahoans interact in these landscapes and the things that really define our lifestyle.
Their lifestyle and their identity.
I go back home with more capacity to love and be compassionate and endlessly patient. And I love being out in nature.
But I would hate to see a big chopping block to a lot of the great resources that are available to the public. It's meant a lot to me. I'm sure there's a lot of people who feel the same way.
And as I mentioned, IDL only manages state endowment land for maximum financial return, but Republican State Senator Ben Adams plans to introduce a bill at the beginning of next session to change that. He wants the legislature to put a constitutional amendment on Idahoans' ballots, setting up a new trust, which is separate from endowment lands. So if federal land comes into the state's hands in the future, it could be put into that trust and never sold or transferred.
In this new trust, that mechanism is not there, that requirement is not there. So there's no incentive to sell. And I think it changes the discussion. Instead of it being, well, we have all this land, we should sell it off, the sell-off needs to be off the table. The discussion needs to shift to, well, who's going to manage it, how's it going to be managed, and who's it going to benefit?
Tomorrow on the 208, we look back on a major wildfire that had devastating impact on the Sawtooths. Federal crews mobilized massive resources to save the iconic Redfish Lake Lodge, but many critiqued their efforts. This debate highlights a key tension. While federal management comes with layers of red tape, as I touched on, that slow fire mitigation, state ownership could mean selling off lands to cover costs Idaho taxpayers really aren't prepared to shoulder, Brian.
Lot to unpack here, Morgan.
Yeah.
The things that stood out to me when we were just talking about watching the story was the state land being sold off. That's a big deal. And as the representative there from Idaho says, you know, if you build this trust, then you can prevent that happening. Sounds like a great idea.
In theory.
Secondly, in theory, yes. Secondly, with the funding, as Representative Fulcher, Congressman Fulcher said, for the Department of Ag and Forestry Service going down, whose job is it to fund those things?
Congress.
Congress.
Yes.
So that would be on him to turn that around if that were the case.
Right, and a lot of conservationists argue that people can make that point, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They can point to it and say, hey, look, the funding's going down. These national recreation areas aren't staffed. Oh, we should, like, scale back, and they're not doing a good job. So that's kind of a concern, but I am hopeful that things are improving in that regard.
Okay, I might have to rewatch this one again.
Yes, all right, Brian.
Thank you very much.
You bet.